Will Work for Patients, episode 61. What up, Will Workers? Frank Sardella here. Do you need money, capital, working capital, startup capital to invest in your practice? And do you have barriers preventing you from doing that? Even if you're sitting there with total barriers and it's completely impossible to get your hands on any capital to invest in your practice, listen up to this episode, because what you've invested so far in creating those opportunities is only 1/3. Yes, 1/3 of the knowledge you should have about it. Find out why more than 50% of the people who have been rejected should have and could have been approved because of unknowns that if they had known, they would have been approved. Does that interest you? Don't miss a word of what my guest has to say. We're going to give you a solution you can apply right now. So get ready to take some notes because we're going to empower you to do something about your own situation. And I'm going to bring all of that to you and more right after this. Stick around. Hey, this is Frank Sardella, host of the Will Work for Patients audio podcast. Over 25 years ago, a chiropractor saved my life, and I've been advocating the profession ever since. Over that time, I have spoken to, screened, and influenced thousands via lectures, screenings, direct-to-public podcasts, and practice owner coaching, helping docs just like you get more people sitting in front of you totally interested in your reported findings. I have been working tirelessly toward the goal of bringing chiropractic to the billions. Now I'm bringing it to everyone to make your local crusade part of a planet-wide initiative so that everyone wins. It all starts right now, right here on Will Work for Patients. That's right, it all does start right here and right now, and guess what? It has started here on Will Work for Patients. I first launched Will Work for Patients way back in 2014 and got on this platform very bravely, and I've been broadcasting ever since, bringing you guests and advice and information. Who am I? Frank Sardella. If you've been following the show, you know who I am, but we have a bunch of new listeners that have been coming on board. And no, I'm not a doctor of chiropractic. What do? I actually speak. I'm an advocate for chiropractic, for wellness, really an advocate of nature's blueprint for the body. I go direct to public, I lecture, I screen, I podcast, talk to people and get them interested not in chiropractic care or treatment or therapy or even lifestyle changes. I get them to start thinking like you do and get them interested in one thing and one thing only, and that's themselves. How their body works, what the structure, function, and purpose of the body are according to nature's blueprint, and that is quite a revelation for people. And that's the purpose of Will Work for Patients here. That's the work I've been doing at this taping for better than 27 years. Reaching for my 4th decade after having my life saved by a chiropractor just from shifting this mindset. And here we are, 30, maybe 40,000 people later in screenings, lectures, surveys. I'm still going strong doing that, and I've gotten thousands under care. And very proud of that fact. And I'm here to help you get thousands under care. But today we're taking a little bit of a different direction. And I hate to get a little surgical and sterile here on practice growth, because it really is all about purpose, and you need to check yourself on purpose. But after all, you are investing in doing what I'm talking about here. And lest we forget that, when we start surgically talking about funding and money, you should check yourself on your purpose. Really revitalize and breathe some life back into that purpose you had. Why did you get into what you're doing? So just realize that any investment you make in your practice is an investment in that. Now today, actually, I am the sponsor of today's episode because I actually believe that this episode will be so epic for you in terms of investing in your own practice. I don't want to distract you with anything else. So I'm actually bankrolling today's episode. This one's on me. Yes, I'm working for free. All these hours it takes to conduct this interview and edit and produce this show, and you have no idea how many hours actually go into each episode. I'm investing that in you today. I consider it an investment in you, and I'm very excited to bring today's guest to you. But let's go in with the attitude of, what are we investing in? Investing in your practice does not mean, well, I'm doing terribly in practice, so I need to borrow just to keep up. I want you to rekindle why you got in, and that's what I want you to fund when we use the word funding in today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by the word funding. Interestingly enough, you may have already funded your practice and your education, and you might be funded to the hilt. And this might be a bit of a touchy subject, but my guest today has gotten a ton of people out of the proverbial soup and hot water of being buried under financial slavery, shall we say, and gotten them into the financial freedom of being able to secure funds to invest in their future. And I want you to take an investment viewpoint. And for that, again, I want you to check your purpose. All I have to tell you about today's guest is I'm bringing you someone I've had personal experience with. He told me a lot of stuff when we first sat down for coffee. He's a longtime friend of mine, but when I finally sat down with him to figure out what he was doing, I thought I knew all these years, and he just blew me away one day. Not only what he's doing, but what he's done for some of his recent clients, and started telling me some of the stories you're going to hear today. And I was dumbfounded and fascinated. And I said, look, if this is indeed true, then I desperately need to bring you to my Will Work for Patients audience. These people are the ones in the trenches who really need this kind of help to be able to invest in a better world. And that's very much what we're doing here. So I investigated his program personally. We went through my personal life and my business life, applied a lot of the principles that you're going to hear today, had him work directly with me and my wife, and we were able to actually make some pretty miraculous changes. And I probably had between 30 and 40 points, immediate improvement in my credit score. However, that was only 1/3 of what I learned from this and of the positive change I was able to make, all within a relatively short time. Lastly, what I want to say about him is it's not one of those programs where you order the book off of TV and you read the book and you apply some things, then you find out you can't do it, and then they basically sell you on a program. What my guest today does is actually work with people to improve their situation in not just credit score, but three major areas, the areas that funding institutions look at. And most of us only look at one of the three. Just keep that in mind with today's episode. I've actually seen him not only work with people, but get people hooked up with funding that they need just directly, and really just kind of cut to the chase, eliminate the middleman, pick your cliche. So let me bring him here to you, sitting right in the studio across from me today. I'm very happy. Please welcome to Will Work for Patients, Greg Maher. Greg, welcome to the show, man. What's going on?
Hey, just having a great day here over in Clearwater and enjoying my lifestyle here.
It's good to have you here in the studio, and I actually, I'm very excited about this one. I actually know the listeners of the show specifically. Most of them are practice owners, some of them are associates, some of them are employees. They're not the doctor, they're not the owner, they don't have any stake in it, but I feel like people of all shapes and sizes, particularly in this economy now, are like living with this. So I'm really particularly happy that you're going to get into the ABCs of not only funding, but like what it takes to be funded in the first place. But I think maybe you can share with us a little bit about your background, kind of how you freaking got into this in the first place. Like, how does one sort of get into this as a profession, let alone evolve to where you've evolved it, which is a very unique place, because I haven't really seen anyone quite like you doing what you're doing. So maybe give us a little backstory to that, yeah?
Absolutely. About several years ago, I was in Manhattan, had a little office on Broadway, and me and my partner, it's an insurance business. We had about a base of 1,500 to about 2,000 clients. And then I go to my partner, I'm like, let's just take a look at starting another business. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. So we did a little bit of survey in the local environment, and we found out that people, they wanted money. They wanted money to start their own business. And this is right by Dykeman, 207th Street. And so they wanted to get barbershops. They wanted to get beauty salons. They wanted to be nannies and have nanny centers. So a lot of the people wanted to kind of get out of the 9-to-5 job and start their own business. That's what we found out people wanted and needed. And then we said, let's go, let's do this. And we just started promoting a little bit. And within the first month, I got about 35 to 40 people coming in through word of mouth saying, hey, listen, I want a loan. So I just find out, hey, what kind of money are you looking for? What time frame do you need it? And ask a few questions. And the first thing we always did was we had to pull their credit profile. And almost one for one, most of them had poor credit or limited credit that prevented them from getting the loan. And so I became a credit specialist.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting to me, especially that people wanted to start their own business. The fact of the matter is that a lot of those people weren't existing business owners. I think there are a lot of people out there who desire to open their own business. And let's put this in context of chiropractic. I mentioned a lot of our listeners are practice owners. Some of them are associates. But I can tell you a lot of them are associates because they have the impression they couldn't own their own practice, right? So some people are like not in business, but would like to be, but don't think it's possible. And then you have the people who think it's possible, but don't know how to, which I think is interesting. Now, that was quite a few years ago that you got into this. So we've had an interesting 2 years recently. I have to tell you, I noticed a lot of people prior to 2020 were starting to get side hustles and, have aspirations of getting hustles. I'm just wondering, has the pandemic also influenced some of this as well? Have you noticed maybe a shift in volume of people interested in that, especially since 2020?
Yeah, well, I think what's happened is the pandemic opened a lot of people's eyes on their dependency for working for their jobs. And so they needed to get a side hustle. And it's a very well-known datum within our industry that there are a lot of people who are looking at establishing and starting a home-based business because during the pandemic, a lot of people were home and then they started working from home and then they realized that they can be doing this for themselves as well. So I think what's happening is there's been a shift and a lot more people are looking at how can they start their own home-based business at the same time while they're working their current job and then grow out of it.
There's a lot to dig into here. When we talk about the ABCs of funding, but we have to talk about a little bit about the ABCs of credit, credit standing, and then there's two types of credit. You have business credit, you have personal credit. First of all, maybe you can guide us through like where the personal credit bleeds over into the business credit, where the line of demarcation between the two are, what the differences are, and what their importances are. Am I correct in assuming that's more or less the foundation of kind of where this all begins, or?
It's not the only factor, but it is a foundation. And if you have your personal credit in, you have your business credit in, then you have a very solid foundation. And then it opens up your doors to have access to many different types of loan options.
Sure.
And options is what, a small business owner wants. And he wants to be able to get the money fast at the cheapest rates, generally speaking, depending upon his circumstance. And so make sure your personal credit is in good shape because there's no escaping your personal credit.
Yeah.
Now you could get a business loan.
Yeah.
You have startup businesses, right, where they need to get funding to launch and start their business. And then you have the category of an existing business. And they've been around for a year or two. Generally speaking, they already have clients and they're already producing. So you separate those two out. Now, if you're a person who's looking to start up a business, well, it's really all credit-based. You really want to get your personal credit really in shape, get your credit score as high as possible. And you also want to make sure that your credit report is what's called a good file, because sometimes there are people who have a high score, but they may have just one credit card with a value of $300. And so they think they have a great score, but that means nothing because what's more important is the actual credit report itself, not the score. The score gets you looked at, but it's not what causes the approval. It's what's on your actual credit report.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get into a lot of those categories in a moment because there are quite a few little details that can snag somebody, even with high credit.
Mm-hmm.
I think the categories we're talking about here, let's just break it down. The first category would be an existing practice owner, has been in practice, let's say, 2 to 20 years. The second one would be somebody who's working as an associate or planning on working as an associate with the aspirations to start their own practice, maybe someday, or maybe not at all because they don't think it's possible. Yeah. The third scenario would be, well, maybe somebody who's not a doctor, who's not going to open their own practice, but may want to get a side hustle going in wellness, or could be a massage therapist who wants to start their own massage therapy business. I'd like to relate each one of these things back to those three categories because I think that would be most helpful.
Okay.
So why don't we get into, I hate to go from the negative side, but you're always talking about the factors that cause denials or get people rejected. Why don't we get into some of the factors now of what causes denials, why they happen, so that people can kind of think with that and maybe have a shot at fixing it?
Yeah, absolutely. What I wanted to say first is there's three fundamentals, right? And I think if we understand the three fundamentals of what gets you a loan, then we can isolate what are the factors that are going to cause you to get denied. It's called the 3 C's of lending. each and every one of these parts is what's going to be able to get you a loan, right?
Sure.
So the first C is credit. If you have good personal credit, then you're going to be able to get some type of funding. But let's say you have poor credit. You have the second C, and that's cash flow. You're going to be able to get a loan based upon the cash flow of your business. And that is, how well do you manage your bank account? How often are you putting revenue into your bank account? You know, in these types of loans, that's strictly based upon your cash flow, where they don't care about your credit. They really just want to see how often are you making your deposits, how much. And the biggest boo-boo that you can make is insufficient funds. So you want to limit the insufficient funds and any overdrafts. Even if you have some, you'll still be qualified for a loan, but that's usually the boo-boo. So prevent any kind of insufficient funds. Yeah. Cash flow type of lending. That's the second C.
That's interesting. I don't think most people think about their bank account when they're thinking about that. They're thinking credit cards and loans and on-time payments and collections and all those kind of things. Hard inquiries. Interesting point.
Yeah. And then the third C is collateral, right? And that's a fundamental. So if you don't have credit, if you don't have cash flow, well, you still might be able to get a type of financing based upon a collateral. What are some of the collaterals out there? Office equipment. If you're a chiropractor or a doctor, office equipment can be used as a security, as an asset. You can lease equipment. That's one type of a loan based upon an asset. Other types of assets can be considered CDs, IRAs, stocks, and bonds. And you can use that as leverage to be able to get a loan to start your business and or grow it. Some businesses out there can basically use, like if you have a book of business and you're an insurance company, you can offer your book of business as a tool to basically get a loan off of that. So that's a type of a collateral. So those are the three C's, and those are the fundamentals, the basics, and everything revolves around those three: credit, cash flow, collateral. Obviously, if you have good cash flow and good credit, you're going to have more options. And if you have great cash flow and poor credit, you're going to still have good options, but the risk for the lender to give it money is going to affect your interest rates and the terms. So they all are interrelated to a certain degree.
Kind of a recipe, really.
Yeah.
So the majority of the people are just concentrating on their credit score, pretty much. Am I right? You know, as far as these three C's are concerned, everybody's like, my credit score. I got to get my credit score up. And then you see commercials on TV, improve your credit score, when in fact, credit is at best 33% of the equation in being able to get funded.
Yeah, out of those three C's, absolutely. It is 1/3.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So somebody doesn't necessarily have to have a 927 credit score to get a loan.
Not at all. There's loans out there where you can actually have a 450 credit score and a 500.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, see, that's what interested me. And I think one of the things you intrigued me with when we first got to talking, you had mentioned somebody who was in, I don't know, the low 500 range maybe, that you had gotten like 30 G's worth of funding for or something. And I'm assuming that's along this premise here, like understanding how to work this system.
If you just know those three and you have one of the three, you can use it as a base and be creative around it. You see, like if you have good credit, then you have options, and how well do you use it to navigate the system to maximize your ability and so forth. So once you get those three, then you know what? When I have an educated client, sometimes we can be a team and we can take a look at what can we use to be able to help get him funding.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell you what, why don't we take these three C's from the lender's point of view?
Yeah.
How they're examining and looking at these things. Because you shocked me with a few details, especially on credit. Not only does your score not have to be super high, but even if your score is high, that there are things on your credit that could be counting derogatorily against you. So like, maybe just give us a little generalized overview of how lenders look at each of these three in turn.
The first thing to really understand it is, what's the lender's viewpoint? What is he looking at? His viewpoint is this: if I give this guy money, am I going to get the money back, and am I going to make a profit? That's all he really cares about. And everything in our system revolves around that one question. If I give him money, is he going to pay me back? And how much profit am I going to make? Now he's going to look at you. He's going to evaluate you, and he's going to determine, and the big word we hear all the time is risk. That's a very important word, risk. What are the risk factors? And I think the general public just the general consumer and the general businessman, they just don't know what the risk factors really are, because what you're saying is they talking about the score. Yeah. Everyone is fixed on the score. Mm-hmm. And believe me, I know, because I have a credit repair organization called Score Up, right? So we help you get your score up.
You're feeding the monster, Greg.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a factor, but everyone fixates their attention on the score. But what they're not really knowledgeable in is looking at what's on their credit report and what are the lenders looking at to determine the risk factors. And I'll give you the example.
Okay.
So let's say, for example, you have an application that you're filling out for a loan, and your personal credit score could be 780. I've had a client have 780 or even an 800. They put in the application, loan comes back, denied. Everyone's in shock.
Yeah.
He has an 800 credit score, 780, whatever it was at the time, right? This has happened a couple times with people with high credit limits. And so I'm credit trained, and I know what those risk factors are. And the client's upset. And I said, okay, good. Let's take a close look at your credit report. What we found out in one of the cases is this one was a consumer credit report.
Okay.
So you have the three major bureaus, TransUnion, Experian, Equifax. And so by looking at his profile, his address on his profile and his credit report was wrong. One simple factor. And so when his application was filled out, he put his current address. It didn't match. They think it's a risk factor. It may not be the actual person. And if it's the algorithm that's checking it, it's incongruent information, denied. So that's one thing that they consider as a risk, because they're not sure if the consumer is who they say they are. So they're going to lean in the direction of denying the person because they're very conservative on that. And also one other factor to think with is when they come up with and look at all these things, there's boards of scientists who are determining what are the risk factors.
In other words, the risk isn't the consumer himself, but the potential imposter of the consumer.
Yes.
And that is also a risk factor for them as well. And I'm sure it's not always as simple and cut and dried as one little address thing, because folks, if you've ever ordered your annual credit report from any of the agencies and looked at it, I mean, yeah, all right, Credit Karma is kind of a summary, but if you get your real credit report from TransUnion, you're going to get a very, very detailed history, like a comprehensive history of you, of every address you've had and, phone numbers and every alias and name. And there are so many things that can be, speaking of incongruency, I'm sure, Greg, it's usually a mixed bag of factors.
Yep.
And they're probably not the most simple, I'm just going to pick up the phone and fix it or go onto the internet and change it kind of things. Like you actually have some work ahead of you to kind of put that together.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, is that the entirety of what you're spending, like the majority of your time doing, getting all this stuff fixed up, or are there other factors on top of this as well?
There's other factors, but usually since we know what the factors are, we tell you to look at a person's credit report and we try to set it up before they go and apply for the loan. So this way it helps the approvals.
Right.
There's numbers of factors. Let's just say, for example, that's as simple as a consumer credit report. They put in the wrong address. Or if you put a P.O. box, most applications that are actually fraudulent
have P.O.
boxes and so forth. So that's why when some people say, well, I'm going to put a P.O. box there for whatever their reason is, they're going to probably get denied in a lot of the cases. It's not always the case, but it sometimes will happen because it's just strictly, it's considered risk factor. Too risky, we're not going to take in this person, even though we see that this application has a 780 credit score.
Yeah, that actually makes sense to me. Yeah. To be honest, this sense of illegitimacy, like what are you hiding behind? Sometimes practically, but impractical financially, if you're looking for loans. Now, how about personal versus business when you're going into the loan market? Let's say you're a practice owner or somebody who'd like to be a practice owner.
Okay.
Where personal comes in, where business comes in, that kind of thing.
So when you're going to start a practice, you're basically just going to get a loan based upon your personal credit, generally speaking.
Sure.
Because most businesses fail. Well, I don't know what the statistics are nowadays, but it's a very well-known datum that most businesses, they fail within 5 years, and after the 5 years, more are going to fail. So if you're asking for money for a great idea, that's great for your creative imagination, but unfortunately, the lender doesn't view it that way. The lender's going to take a look at this is most likely going to fail.
Yeah, because people don't know how to run a business.
Exactly. That's the bottom line. So when you're going to start a business, you're going to have to launch it with your personal credit, right? Generally speaking, unless you have your own savings, family, you could do crowdfunding. There's other ways of raising money, but generally speaking, it's going to be determined upon your credit and your personal cash flow and how much of income you have in relationship to your debt. It's called the debt to income ratio, right?
Sure.
But one of the things that you can do, as a solution to start and launch your business is usually through credit cards.
Yeah.
Because maybe they might be able to get a $5,000 loan or $10,000 loan, but that's just not going to cut it if you need $50,000 to $100,000.
True.
So what you could do as a startup business owner, get your personal credit in shape, right? And it doesn't need to take long. Sometimes I have clients who are in apathy on it. They say, I have this collection on there. It's going to be on there for another 5 years. Well, let me assure you, in a lot of cases, you can clean up your credit in a month or two in some cases, and it could go as long as a year and a half. It depends upon your profile. But you don't need to wait 7 years. You can handle it very rapidly and quickly. And the reason you can is because there are a lot of errors and mistakes in your credit report, and you have your rights based upon the Fair Credit Reporting Act and these other laws. You could get these removed off of your credit report honestly, ethically, because there's usually errors and mistakes on any types of negative accounts.
I can attest to that personally. I mean, Greg, just some of the advice you gave, I experienced almost an immediate boost. I hate to emphasize on the score, but it is a metric.
Yeah.
And my score must have jumped 30-something points just from having fixed the disaster area that my report was.
Yeah.
I thought I was unique, but then when you looked at it, you were like, oh no, I see this and worse all the time. Like I wasn't even the worst.
Yeah.
And so I can personally attest to that. I see that, that is obviously a factor in what they're looking at.
80% of everyone in America has inaccuracies on their credit report. And I believe that statistic is higher because I haven't come across one person who I haven't seen a 100% accurate credit report up to date. But when it comes to starting up a business, you may go to a bank, you may be able to get your money, but when you have a person who's a specialist in the funding space, there's a technique called credit card stacking is a term, unsecured business finance. That's another term that just means credit card stacking. And basically what it means is you're going to get multiple credit cards to make your target or goal. So this way you can start and launch your business. Whereas by yourself, you can maybe get $5,000 to $10,000. And then if you continue to apply in certain locations, you will start getting automatic rejections. So when you go to a professional, they're going to be able to sit down with you, go over your credit report with you, navigate a strategy. So instead of just getting that $5,000 to $10,000, you're going to have the potential to get $50,000 to $100,000 to $150,000 of personal credit, generally at 0% interest for about a year. And then you can use that to start and launch your business. And there are techniques out there too, where you can take those credit cards and you can liquidate them and turn them into actual cash if needed. But in today's world, you can pretty much buy everything with your credit card. And I suggest it in today's world because if you use your credit card, you're going to get mileage, you're going to get cash back, you're going to get all these rewards, and you're actually going to use your cards, as far as and use them to your advantage, not to use them to your disadvantage.
Right.
Yeah.
The majority of the people who listen in here are pretty well established in practice. Let's talk about the practice owners that already established in practice for a number of years. Let's say more than 2 years.
Okay.
Most of them a lot more than that. What about that categorically? Yeah. Where do they stand? Obviously, they don't have to start with personal credit, but their business credit and their personal credit can be debarring them right now from funding as well. So what are some of the barriers you perceive there? And what is the mindset and the relative health of their credit supposed to be for them to be able to get anything done here? There's a lot of people who are looking for money right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as far as existing businesses who have been at it for 2 years or more, their personal credit is valuable, but since they're existing, they're developing their sales, they have revenue coming in, you basically can get the loan off of the revenue, and that's important. But 80% of all small businesses in America can't get funding at banks. Even if they have good credit and there's nothing majorly wrong, banks just lend to 20% of all small business owners in America. That's just the statistic. So that leaves 80% of all your business owners out there don't have access to the banks because the banks are very conservative and they usually like to see strong C's. Remember, we talked about the 3 C's.
Right.
You're not going to get a loan in a bank without good credit.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to need some type of collateral usually. The banks also want to see how much money you usually have in your savings account and bank account. They also are going to take time. They're going to take a look at it, evaluate you. They're going to want to take a look at your profit and loss statements. And then you're going to have to wait. And then usually you're going to get rejected because they're very conservative. So if you could get the amount of money that you want in the time frame that you want from a bank, then you always go to a bank first because the banks are going to give you the best rates. Right. So that's rule number one. But for what do the other business owners do, the 80%? Well, they basically have to go towards alternative lending. And there's a lot of institutions out there that do alternative lending. And these types of loans are a little bit more expensive and they're a little bit more creative to help the small business owner. This is where you have your Cabbage, your Lendio, and some of these businesses out there that do lending. So as a small business owner, it's just cash flow. A lot of it has to do with your cash flow and the way you manage your bank accounts. And usually as a general rule, you're going to get 10% of your cash flow. So if you're doing $10,000 a month in sales, you're going to get about a $10,000 loan for about 3 months, high interest rates generally, but you can always refinance it after 3 months after you've been paying your debt to the lender and you build up some trust. And then you can refinance it, get better terms and so forth. That's mostly based upon cash flow. And that's what they're looking at is your bank accounts, generally speaking. Now, when you take a look at what can cause you to be rejected.
Yeah.
Right?
They get rejected, but they're not really, but nobody really gives you the fundamentals of look, this is the basic of what we looked at, and this is why you're a risk to us.
That's right.
Usually you get some sort of generalized answer. So this would be very useful.
Yeah, well, you can be rejected for several different reasons. Personal credit. Incongruency is the number one reason. Incongruent data. Let's say, for example, you fill out your name is Joe Blow on your application, and on your credit report, your name is spelled backwards.
Right.
Incongruent data, cause a rejection. Sometimes there's credit bureaus and other institutions that basically have tons of information on you. Mm-hmm. Like there's LexisNexis. This is what the CIA, the FBI use to find out your whole history. Sometimes there may be a criminal mark on you that you don't even know about, a bankruptcy, child support issues. What's been happening lately on a few of my clients, and I've seen on their personal credit report, they have their business EIN number as their personal security, and sometimes they're swapped. So when you put your EIN number on your application, you got to make sure that it matches. Or sometimes you got to take a look at as well as what field are you in? Are you in just chiropractic? Are you in healthcare? Sometimes there might be, there's codes that determine what type of business you're in. And sometimes your code is wrong and they think you're in a different industry than what you're saying. That's incongruent data.
Who would have known?
Exactly. I had a client the other day where there was some information on his taxes that wound up being incongruent with his application. Okay. And so he got denied. And then he had to go take care of the information on the taxes just because the data from the IRS was a little incongruent with what was on his application.
Wow.
And so it's really incongruency. 60% of all businesses basically don't get approved for those incongruencies. Some other incongruencies could be just your address. Sometimes you can say that you're working at this location, and then what happens is it says a different location, or your LexisNexis doesn't have an update of your address on your credit report. And so what happens is when they put all the information through an algorithm, it doesn't match and it says, okay, good, this is incongruent data. We're not going to take this loan.
That's insane.
Yeah, but here's a tip. It may take a little work and effort. Usually if you're getting rejected, it's mostly because of an algorithm.
Wow.
So know that a person's usually probably not looking at it. It depends.
Right.
So what you can always do is get a second opinion, ask for a manual underwriting, and get a live person and have them review the documents so it builds up the like and trustability.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Just based on what you've seen, and you can ballpark this for me, based on your experience.
Sure.
What percentage of people that are applying for loans and are rejected would you say should be approved based on these factors alone? Just from what you've seen. Ballpark it.
Mm-hmm. Through my experience, about 50%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So half the loans out there, folks. In fact, half of you people listening right now to this broadcast could potentially be approved, or probably should have been approved, if not for any of these errors and things like that. And if not for a computer administrating it as opposed to an underwriter, a live underwriter, which is very, very interesting to me. I didn't even think of that when you get these rejection letters and whatever, especially when you go to the auto dealer, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then they take your application and they go back to the finance desk and they're working, you're waiting there an hour and you check your credit report 3 days later and there's 20 inquiries because they're trying to get you funded.
They're like, we want to make money on this car. We want to make money on this. Let's just apply everywhere and do a shotgun technique.
Exactly. I mean, it's crazy, but
I do have a recommendation for that too.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. If you ever want to go to an auto lender, just bring your own credit report. Make sure it's a FICO credit report and have it ready, and then ask them what their eligibility requirements are. This is a good, powerful datum. Know before you go. Before you even let them run your credit report, go, what are the requirements? What makes me eligible? And what are the disqualifiers? And when you ask these questions, you should know what's on your credit report before you go. And then show him your actual credit report if he knows what he's talking about. And if he seems to know a lot about it, what's getting approved and not, have him review it. If he says he can really get you the car and get you financing based upon what he saw,
then let her rip.
Yeah. But otherwise, just have that ready, have your own credit report, a FICO-driven score. Again, it's not even so much about the score. Just have your credit report, because it's not about the score. It's about taking a look at what's on it.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
In fact, folks, I'd recommend you do it before you test drive the car, because this way you don't fall in love with it and end up with a heartbreak. You know, we hate that. You're denied and you walk out of the dealership. You already drove the car. That's great advice, Greg. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Folks, I want you to take to heart what Greg's saying here. Even if you have to play the episode a couple times over, what I'd like you to do is really listen through the things we talked about here and kind of categorically look at yourself in each area. List out some traits, like do a screening on yourself, like a financial screening, a self-screening. You know, I'm always out there when I'm screening for chiropractic or even dentistry. I'm having people look in the mirror or assess their own health before they even make first contact with a chiropractor or a dentist or anyone of the like. And self-awareness is the most important point in any area. As you know, you tell people this every single day. Well, in finance, too many times we go to a lender, or like in an auto dealership, we go to the retailer who has a lender. Just as your patients are coming to your clinic and then trying to go to a lender and get care credit or this or that, you know, trying to get approved for a credit card so they can pay for your treatment plan. You know, oftentimes we just put it into someone else's lap and we let them look at us instead of us looking at us first. And I think Greg really just summed that up in just this simple little auto dealer thing, which you could do with anything. So what I'd like you to do is actually look over your own status, like pull your credit reports, like, you know, go and see what's listed in Credit Karma and why and whatever. Look at your consistency or whatever you can find of it. Now, Greg's got all kinds of tools we're going to tell you about in a minute before we let him go. And I'm going to make him promise you a few things. I'm going to extort a few freebies out of him.
Oh, no.
But do that. And then what I'm going to have you do is, with that in mind, take a look at if there's something to be looked at there. And then I'm actually going to tell you how to hook up with Greg so that you guys can work together to figure that out, because as you know, there's a 50% chance you're eligible even if you were told you're ineligible. But before we get to that, Greg, if you could actually, like, given all of this area and understanding like who's listening and what they're about, like what would kind of be a piece of advice before you head out the door, like sort of an overall governing guideline that people should really have to keep their wits about them in this area and be able to navigate in business, whether they're in a future business or whether they're in business now and they want to stay in business and grow?
What's important to a broker and what we want to help our client with is, what's the return of investment? You see, I think that's the most important question that a business owner needs to ask himself on, does the loan make sense? Because sometimes what can happen is they're going to say, well, what are my rates? What are this? What are that? All of that matters to a degree. But what matters most is, no matter what money you get, you should have a plan in place to make sure that you're going to get a return on your loan. Because let's say, for example, you get a $100,000 loan. Let's say it's going to cost you $20,000, $30,000. So that's $130,000 that you're borrowing. Are you going to be able to make a return? Are you going to make $200,000 on it, $300,000? Then it makes sense and you go with it, and it's not a matter of the rates. That's what you really have to take a look at. And then you can determine, well, how can I lower the rates the best I can to save myself money? And that's the secondary thing you should do. Do I have a plan in place to make sure that I can use this money to make more money? That's the most important question that you should have before you even go to a broker or asking questions about if I can get a loan or not a loan, what are your rates and so forth. Because it varies so much based upon your personal credit, your business credit, your bankability, and so forth.
I think that's my favorite thing anyone said in the last 50-something episodes of this show.
Oh, wow.
Seriously.
Yeah.
because it's such a great point. And so many people look at borrowing money, especially if they're in desperate times and they're borrowing just to, quote, stay afloat, or to get through a lean period. That's not necessarily going to have a return on investment. And that's the thing, return on investment, folks. I think that's what you need to take away from what Greg's saying here. When you're taking a loan, make sure that the money you're borrowing and receiving is an investment in something. And an investment implies a profit is made off of it. And that's a great point, because people are thinking, I'm borrowing $100,000, but they just paid $20,000, $30,000. The bank sure is making a profit off of you. They're getting something in return for giving you that money.
Absolutely.
So make sure that you add on what additional you're paying them, 120, 130 on 100,000, and make absolutely certain that you're going to make a considerable amount more than that back in return on investment, that actual growth happens. Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but I think it's even more so important during trying economic times. I would even wager that it's probably the best time to expand. You know how everybody's saying expand in a recession. In the Great Depression, how all these companies like Wrigley's and whatever became these multi-million and billion-dollar corporations because they were the only ones who didn't pull back from investing and marketing their product. And I guess a lot of people were stressed out during the Great Depression and wanted to chew gum. And they kept promoting and they grew. It's actually an opportunity for you to grow, especially in the profession you are. If you're in a health and wellness related profession right now, we live in a pandemic world. We live in a fearful world of health and wellness right now. You are so poised to be able to grow in this environment. So this is an investment, and you should treat it that way. So Greg, thanks for that. That was really a gem.
Awesome.
So this is where I extort some stuff out of you.
Okay, cool.
For free. Folks, I can tell you from personal experience, I had Greg help out with personal stuff with me, starting with my personal credit. My wife and I started pulling our personal information, whatever he requested, and it was actually quite easy to do. It was a little tedious, but totally worth the exercise of doing it, because it really woke me up to understanding that. What I haven't done yet is look at the other two C's, although I have gotten working capital based on my cash flow. So it's definitely valid. And collateral I have to look at. So Greg, what could you do as like an initial thing for these people? Like if they were to contact you and say, Greg, I heard you on Will Work for Patients. What would you be willing to do for them, to do them a little solid, to get them moving on this project?
Absolutely. The first thing I would do is just do a credit consultation for free.
Okay.
We just simply take a look at your credit report. We'll go over it with you, and we'll go over it line by line by line, and then we'll find out any factors that might be inconsistent, incongruent, any factors that may be suppressing your score, because if you have factors that are suppressing your score, you'd want to get rid of them, right? And then if you wanted to set yourself up for getting a loan and you wanted to set yourself up for your future, then we'd make some free recommendations. That's what I like doing. This is an amazing thing. I had one client who she wanted to get some funding. And so we were working on her score, and we got her score up to about 690. And then there was just one credit card that was left. It was only $300 credit card, and it was maxed out. And she said, Greg, it's only $300. Do I really need to wait another couple of weeks just to pay this down before it shows up on my credit report before I go for my funding? And I said, yeah, we did it. $300, paid down that one card, and her score went from around, it was a while ago, about 670, 680, and we got it up to 730.
Wow.
Yeah, and in her profile, for her profile, it created a major impact, because just that $300 limit, you think it's no big deal, but it was actually being heavily penalized because it's 100% utilization of that small card.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I've been learning that as well. And folks, if that doesn't sound that appealing to you, let me just kind of attest, because I've gone through this process. When I first looked, I took a look first before I had Greg go over my stuff. And when we pulled our credit reports and we started looking it over, just on the incongruencies alone, like I was able to see them right away. But I have to tell you, it's not as simple as that. And it wasn't until Greg looked at it with me that not only did I further understand the deeper significance of it, but also the cause of it and where it was coming from. Because when you look at it and you see those incongruencies, it's not always immediately apparent where they're coming from and how exactly it got to that point where it's all confused, and then which alias of yours or should be the centralized one. And why is there this other one that doesn't seem to match up to anything that you have on any current account you have? Greg is actually very adept at doing that. So him offering to do this free of charge for you is actually a pretty big deal. So I want you to take advantage. So first of all, how would they hook up with this free consultation, Greg? What would they do?
You can just go to my website, scoreuphelp.com, and then you can just basically type in your email and we'll respond within 24 hours and set up a free consultation with you.
Okay, so scoreuphelp.com, that's score up, that's a good thing, help.com. Right there on the page, you scroll down and hit the button that says Start Today under the consultation, and that will take you there to a form you can fill out. Greg will reach out and contact. Can they reach out directly? Can they give you a call?
Absolutely. Just give us a call, 1-800-377-0128.
800-377-0128. Go ahead and reach out to him toll free. Greg, first of all, I want to thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Just the amount of knowledge I can tell you, anybody listening, even if they didn't reach out to you, I'm sure learned something they didn't know. And hopefully that'll be worth its weight in gold or loan money and investments in practice growth. So I want to thank you for helping practice owners. We do a pretty big job here by inspiring them into business, and particularly since March 2020 through now, it's really providing a lot of help. So I want to thank you very much for being here and giving of your time, and also offering so generously of your time to do these consultations with people. It really means a lot to me personally. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for having me, Frank.
Yeah. And folks, I again encourage you to go ahead and reach out to Greg, even if it's just to have a chat with him. If you're wondering, about specifics about your situation, you can always talk to him. He's always willing to discuss that with you even before he forensically gets into your credit reports and you start showing him your stuff. And let me tell you, more than just the 3 credit reporting agencies are going to come into play. I was a little bit shocked. He started mentioning names of things I didn't even know. When we were pulling these reports, some of them had to be done by mail. But when all was said and done and we got everything together, which only took a couple of days, we had not only a very clean picture, but I was a lot more optimistic about what my prospects were for the future. And I've seen Greg work some utter miracles, so definitely reach out to him. So, Will Workers, I hope that you're taking away a fortune from this episode. And I hope your future is a fortune in wellness created for planet Earth. Have you looked around lately, particularly in the last couple years? Let me not leave you in depression here. I want to inspire you into knowing that a renaissance is upon us, and we are the bringers of that renaissance. And I'm out there in the trenches still. I have not stopped because of the pandemic. 250 talks wiped off my schedule for the year of 2020 within 48 hours. But they couldn't stop me. I continued to talk online. I'm putting my podcasts out there. The wellness broadcast has been going strong. More and more people are listening, and I am really putting it out there, and so have you been, and I want to commend you for that. Even when things looked grim, most practice owners, even if they were below 50% capacity, were still in the trenches doing it, and I don't know a single one who decided to close up shop, and I've seen your resolve climb. We are upon a renaissance, and this worldwide pandemic has been a tremendous opportunity for us to take the world stage like we've been wanting and desiring to do for so many years. And it's now our time. People really are starting to reach for better answers. They're not really believing. Underneath it all, if you really talk to people, they're not even buying what they're forwarding. And this is a tremendous opportunity for us. So take that one to the bank. And I'm really excited to bring you another couple of episodes. I got a bunch more in the hopper for you here, and I'm going to keep them this level good. But do get in contact with Greg Maher via the resources that we gave you, scoreuphelp.com. Definitely opt in. They'll reach out to you. Hey, mention you heard him here on Will Work for Patients. Greg really likes what I'm doing here. He's very much in alignment with it and wants to help. So do mention you're a listener of Will Work for Patients. And speaking of Will Work for Patients, thank you for following the show. Thank you for listening to this episode and all the other episodes. We're on all the platforms. We're on Audible now, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Deezer, any podcast app. You can search the show and you can find it in there. But you can always go to willwork4patients.com, willwork4patients.com to see all the episodes there. But if you go to willwork4patients.com/subscribe, and if you right there tell me where to send the episodes, Every time I drop an episode, I will email you to let you know that it's dropped. Follow me on Instagram at willwork4patients. Again, the number 4. DM me there or email me at frank@screeningexperts.com. Any things you'd like to hear here on the show, questions about your practice. I've been working with chiropractors for nearly 3 decades now. With my special method, the true screening process that I've developed, mastering actually getting a person into a right state of mind to show up for a day one and be interested in a report of findings. That stuff is my jam, and creating it out of your existing patients, creating a patient referral army out of your current patient base. And I'm talking about those inactives, as you label them. I hate that word. I'm not talking about the ones are referring. You've got patients out there who are failing at it. Every single one of your patients has tried to send you at least one other patient. Think about that for a second. Think about the number of your patients who refer, even if it's a lot. Then think about the number of total patients that you've seen and realize each of them has tried to refer at least one and failed and then gave up and feels guilty about it. I have a whole book on that called How to Recruit and Deploy a Patient Referral Army. So you can ask me questions. DM me on Instagram at willwork4patients and frank@screeningexperts.com on the email. And reach out to me. We've run out of time for today's episode. Really happy we had Greg here, and I'm mostly really happy that you were here with us today. Greg's smiling at me across the desk here because he crushed it today. So nonetheless, I will be right back here with you with another killer blockbuster episode. And from here forward, we are together investing in your practice. I promise you that. I will work for patients. Will you? Yes, you will. That's why I'm investing in you and this show. So, my friends, we've come to the end of a Practice Renaissance Creating episode. On behalf of myself, my sponsors, our guest Greg Maher, and the rest of the Broadcast Wellness crew, I thank you so very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for another practice ass-kicking episode of Will Work for Patients. Be good. Will Work for Patients podcast is a Broadcast Wellness production powered by Screening Experts LLC. Executive producer Frank Sardella. All content copyright 2014. For more information about the show, visit willwork4patients.com or on Instagram at willwork4patients.